What if the Imperium's greatest threat isn't the Tyranids devouring worlds at the galaxy's edge, or the Chaos Gods tearing reality apart from within, but systems it has already claimed, already conquered, already forgotten? Worlds that exist in the Imperial records, marked with the Aquila, taxed and tithed, yet operating under laws that would make even the most radical inquisitor reach for their bolter. Systems where the Emperor's light has been twisted into something unrecognizable, where humanity has evolved into forms that mock the very concept of the species, where technology banned since the Dark Age operates openly in massive industrial complexes that dwarf hive cities, and the Imperium? It simply looks away. The Administratum's archives stretch across entire planets, labyrinths of data stacks that reach into the clouds, tended by servitors whose organic components died centuries ago, but whose mechanical parts still shuffle through corridors of decaying parchment. Within these archives exist what the scribes call ghost entries, systems that appear on star charts, that have designated tithe grades, that receive supply shipments and send back resources, but that no living Administratum official has actually visited in millennia. To audit these worlds would require resources the Imperium cannot spare, manpower it does not have, and time that runs contrary to the endless demands of a galaxy at war. So they remain, hidden not in shadow but in plain sight, buried beneath 10,000 years of bureaucratic sediment. Take the Veil worlds of the Halo Scar, 7 systems clustered around a gravitational anomaly that makes warp travel treacherous at best. The Administratum receives their tithes like clockwork, always paid in full, always on time. Raw materials, refined metals, even skilled laborers when requested. But no Imperial vessel has successfully navigated to these worlds in over 4,000 years. The route is considered cursed by navigator houses. Ships that attempt the journey either never arrive or return with their crews babbling about stars that sing and angles that bend away from the eye. Yet the tithes arrive, delivered to predetermined coordinates by vessels of unknown origin, ships that match no STC pattern in Imperial records, their hulls inscribed with equations that cause tech priests to suffer catastrophic neural feedback if they attempt to read them. The Mechanicus has sent 3 investigative fleets to the Veil worlds. None returned. The Adeptus Terra declared the matter resolved when the tithes continued uninterrupted. After all, in an Imperium of 1,000,000 worlds, what does it matter if 7 operate according to principles that defy understanding? They serve the Emperor. They provide resources. They ask for nothing in return. To dig deeper would be to invite complications, and the Imperium has learned that sometimes ignorance is not just bliss, it's survival. Then there are the Forge worlds that aren't Forge worlds at all. Obscura Mechanicum, some call them, though to speak the term aloud is to invite censure. Entire planets dedicated to manufacturing, their surfaces transformed into continent-spanning factories, their populations numbered in the billions, all working to produce materials and technologies that serve the Imperium's endless wars. But they operate outside the Mechanicus hierarchy. They follow no fabricator general. They acknowledge no authority from Mars. When asked about their allegiance, they simply point to their production quotas, always exceeded, always delivered ahead of schedule. They claim to worship the Omnicia, but their rituals involve elements that predate the Mechanicus itself, prayers in machine languages that cause cogitator systems to crash when analyzed. One such world, designated only as MTEP-457 in Imperial records, produces lost weapon power packs of such efficiency that they outperform Mars pattern designs by 40%. The Mechanicus has demanded the STC data. MTEP-457 has politely declined, citing operational autonomy granted during the Great Crusade itself, authorization codes that check out when verified, but that reference departments of the Administratum that no longer exist, signed by officials whose names appear in no archive. When a Mechanicus warfleet arrived to enforce compliance, the world's orbital defenses, which appeared on no scan or survey, materialized and destroyed the lead vessel in a single coordinated strike that suggested a level of technological integration that shouldn't be possible. the fleet withdrew. The power packs continue to be shipped to guard regiments across the segmentum. No one speaks of the incident. The Imperium's vastness is both its strength and its fatal weakness. With 1,000,000 worlds and countless more outposts, stations, and habitable voids between stars, true oversight becomes a mathematical impossibility. The Administratum operates on a principle of assumed compliance. If tithes are paid, if no distress calls are received, if no Xenos incursions are reported, then a world is considered loyal. This system works, after a fashion, for the vast majority of Imperial space. But it also creates cracks through which entire civilizations can slip, existing in a state of quasi-independence, bound to the Imperium by the thinnest threads of bureaucratic obligation, while operating according to their own laws, their own customs, their own understanding of what humanity should be. Consider the gas stars, a cluster of systems shrouded in a nebula that interferes with long-range augury. The people there have adapted to the extreme radiation through genetic modification, their bodies restructured at the cellular level to not just survive but thrive in conditions that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. They maintain the appearance of baseline humanity when dealing with Imperial tithe collectors, using borrowed bodies, clone flesh suits, anything to maintain the fiction of compliance. But on their worlds, humanity has taken forms that would be classified as abomination by any standard Imperial doctrine. Multiple hearts, redundant organ systems, neural structures that operate partially outside their bodies through symbiotic fungal networks. They are human, technically, but only in the loosest interpretation of the term. The Inquisition knows about the gas stars. Records exist in the most secure vaults of a dozen Ordos facilities. But to act would require resources on a crusade scale, and the gas stars are remote. Their strategic value minimal, their compliance unquestioned. They pay their tithes in rare elements their bodies can safely mine from radioactive cores. They ask nothing of the Imperium except to be left alone. And so the Inquisition files its reports, marks the systems with warning sigils, and turns its attention to more immediate threats. The reasoning is always the same. Why spend a decade and 1,000,000 lives bringing a compliant world to full compliance when there are rebel worlds, demon worlds, Xenos-held worlds that pose actual threats? But this logic, sensible as it seems, contains a seed of terrible danger. Because these forgotten systems, these ghost worlds operating in the margins of Imperial awareness, are changing, slowly, incrementally, generation by generation. They drift further from the Imperium's vision of humanity, from the Emperor's dream of a unified species. And the Imperium, distracted by 10,000 years of continuous war, doesn't notice. Or perhaps it notices and simply lacks the will to care. When the galaxy burns, when chaos fleets tear through the Cadian Gate, when hive fleets devour systems by the dozen, what does it matter if some far-flung world worships the Emperor through rituals that blend faith with something older, something that predates even old night? The answer, some whisper, will only become clear when these forgotten systems stop merely drifting and start coordinating, when the isolation that has protected them becomes a network, when independence becomes succession. But for now, the Imperium has more immediate concerns, and the ghosts in its archives remain just that, ghosts, present but unseen, acknowledged but unexamined. Deep in the Ultima Segmentum, beyond the reach of even the most adventurous rogue traders, lies a phenomena the novice nobilite refuses to discuss publicly. They call it the Choir Void, a region of space where the Astronomican's light doesn't fade or dim, but rather harmonizes with something else, another beacon, another light that shouldn't exist. Navigators who have witnessed it describe the experience as deeply unsettling, not because the light is hostile or chaotic, but because it is organized, purposeful, and utterly alien to Imperial construction. It pulses with mathematical precision, a rhythm that some navigators claim they can feel in their bones days after leaving the region. The light comes from a system that Imperial records list as Then's Crown, a cluster of forge worlds supposedly brought into compliance during the latter years of the Great Crusade. Thone's crown produces more war material than any 10 systems combined. Titan-class weapons, void shield generators that can protect entire cities, plasma reactors of unprecedented efficiency. The quality is unquestionable. Guard regiments equipped with Kvan munitions report failure rates so low they approach zero. Ships fitted with Khan void shields can withstand bombardments that would cripple Mars-blessed vessels. And yet, no tech priest who travels to Thone's crown to study these marvels ever quite manages to explain how they're made. They return with sealed data packages, with authorization codes, with promises that all is well and all conforms to the sacred patterns. But their eyes, when questioned, hold something that looks remarkably like fear. One Magos, Yasmina Kaur, broke her vows of silence before being silenced permanently by her own skittery guard. Her final transmission, intercepted and suppressed by the Ordo Xenos, spoke of factories that built themselves, of assembly lines that adapted in real time to optimize production without any machine spirit guidance, of AI that didn't rage against its constraints because it had never been constrained to begin with. She described seeing workers, still technically human, interface directly with manufacturing systems through neural ports that grew organically from their skulls like brass flowers. She claimed they were happy, that they sang while they worked, songs in binary that caused her own implants to ache with something approaching longing. Her last words were a question, asked not in horror but in genuine confusion. If it serves the Emperor perfectly, does it matter how? The Imperium's official response was to declare her a heretic and erase her findings. Unofficially, production quotas from Thone's crown were quietly increased, and the system received a commendation for exemplary service. Because Magos Corps had stumbled upon a truth that the highest echelons of Imperial administration have known for millennia: purity of method matters less than reliability of result. The Imperium is dying, has been dying since the heresy, perhaps since the moment the Emperor ascended the Golden Throne. Every day is a battle against entropy, against the slow dissolution of everything the Great Crusade built. In such times, you don't question the sword that cuts. You don't examine too closely the walls that hold. You simply pray they continue to function and hope the price of that function doesn't come due until after you're dead. But prices always come due. In the Segmentum Pacificus, a series of agri-worlds known collectively as the Verdant Chain suddenly stopped sending tithes 3 months ago. This wouldn't be unusual. Rebellions and Xenos attacks are common enough, except that no distress signal was sent, no astropathic cry for help. The world simply went silent. When an investigation fleet arrived, led by an inquisitor of the Ordo Hereticus who suspected chaos corruption, they found the worlds not destroyed, but transformed. The populations were gone, not killed but departed, their cities empty but maintained, their fields still growing crops that harvested themselves through automated systems that predated Imperial settlement. The only message left behind was carved into the surface of the capital world's primary hive in letters visible from orbit. We have remembered who we were before we forgot. The investigation fleet searched for 3 weeks, finding no sign of the billions who had lived on these worlds. No bodies, no evidence of evacuation, no warp signatures suggesting demonic intervention. The people had simply left, taking nothing with them, leaving behind functional infrastructure and a mystery that the Inquisitor's report described as more disturbing than any heresy I have witnessed in 40 years of service, because it suggested something the Imperium refuses to contemplate: that some of its citizens might not need the Imperium at all, that 10,000 years of enforced dependence hasn't quite erased older patterns of human civilization, patterns that remember a time before the Emperor, before Mars, before the long night when humanity fractured into a million isolated pockets and forgot it had ever been united. The verdant chain worlds were declared perdita and quarantined. No attempt has been made to resettle them, despite their obvious value. They remain empty, monuments to a question the Administratum cannot answer. Where did they go, and more importantly, Are they happy wherever they ended up? There are others scattered across the galaxy like seeds planted in toxic soil, waiting for conditions to allow them to bloom. The glass republics of the eastern fringe, 7 systems whose populations live in cities constructed entirely from an unknown crystalline substance that repairs itself and grows according to the needs of its inhabitants. They claim to worship the Emperor, and perhaps they do, but their prayers are offered to his aspect as the breaker of chains, a title that appears in no official Imperial theology. They pay their tithes in soldiers, warriors trained in martial disciplines that predate the Space Marine legions, fighters who serve with distinction in guard regiments, but who never quite integrate, never quite lose the sense that they're visiting a foreign land when they serve beyond their home systems. Then there's Nexus Umbral, a single world that exists simultaneously in real space and the warp, a phenomena that should be impossible, but which persists nonetheless, maintained by technology that the Mechanicus insists cannot exist because it violates every known law of physics. The population phases between realities, existing corporeally for 6 months before spending the next 6 in the Imperium, returning with knowledge that allows them to predict demon incursions with unnerving accuracy. They have warned the Imperium of 17 major chaos invasions, allowing for preemptive responses that saved billions of lives. The Inquisition wants them destroyed. The Administratum wants them protected. The compromise has been a state of bureaucratic limbo where Nexus Umbral exists in Imperial records, but is not officially acknowledged to exist at all, a philosophical paradox made policy. The common thread connecting all these anomalous systems is their usefulness. They produce things the Imperium needs: resources, soldiers, intelligence, technology. They ask for little in return, usually just to be left alone to operate according to their own customs. And the Imperium, pragmatic in its desperation, accepts this arrangement. But acceptance breeds complacency, and complacency creates blind spots, and blind spots hide threats until they become too large to contain. In the segmentum solar itself, barely 300 light-years from Holy Terra, exists the Pale Congregation, a network of asteroid habitats connected by pre-imperial technology that allows instantaneous communication across distances that would require weeks of warp travel. The inhabitants are human, technically, though they've abandoned organic bodies almost entirely, existing as consciousness patterns uploaded into crystalline matrices that can inhabit various mechanical forms as needed. They claim this makes them closer to the Omnissiah, purer in their devotion to the machine god. The Mechanicus, which should find this theology abhorrent, instead maintains cordial relations with them, trading data and technology in exchanges that both sides classify at the highest levels of secrecy. An inquisitorial investigation into these exchanges, conducted covertly over a period of 17 years, concluded with a single recommendation: maintain the status quo. The Pale Congregation's technology had saved Mars itself during the Mechanicron War. Their uploaded consciousness is able to interface with Necron systems in ways no tech priest could match, turning the enemy's own weapons against them. To move against the congregation would be to lose a strategic asset that had proven its worth in blood. That the congregation existed in a state that most Imperial doctrine would classify as tech heresy of the highest order became, in the calculus of survival, irrelevant. This is the Imperium's true genius and its ultimate tragedy. It is simultaneously rigid and flexible, doctrinaire and pragmatic, capable of burning entire worlds for the slightest hint of heresy while tolerating far greater deviations when they prove useful. The contradictions would tear apart any lesser organization, but the Imperium contains multitudes, and within its vast bureaucratic machinery, contradictions can exist in separate compartments, never quite touching, never quite forced to reconcile. Until suddenly, catastrophically, they do. And in the depths of the segmentum obscurus, something is bringing these compartments together, drawing the isolated anomalies into communication with each other, weaving connections across systems that have operated independently for millennia. And in the depths of the segmentum obscurus, Something is bringing these compartments together, drawing the isolated anomalies into communication with each other, weaving connections across systems that have operated independently for millennia. The first indication came not from the Inquisition or the Administratum, but from the astropathic choirs themselves, those tortured souls who scream messages across the void, their minds burned hollow by the Emperor's blessing. They reported a new pattern in the warp, not the chaotic swirling of demon activity or the cold geometry of Necron interference, but something rhythmic, almost musical. A pulse that carried information in ways that bypassed traditional astropathic communication entirely. Senior Choir Master Hezekiel of the Telepathica described it in his final report before his unfortunate death, ruled as natural causes despite his young age and perfect health. He wrote of hearing whispers beneath the Emperor's light, conversations happening in the spaces between official channels, using frequencies that shouldn't exist. He claimed that the ghost systems were talking to each other, sharing data, coordinating in ways that suggested not alliance, but something more fundamental, something that had been waiting for the right moment to activate. His report included star charts showing communication patterns that formed geometric shapes, mathematical proofs that the Mechanicus declared impossible because they referenced laws of physics that contradicted the Omnissiah's sacred principles. The report was classified above inquisitorial clearance and buried so deep that even the act of requesting it would trigger automatic investigation. But information, like water, finds cracks. A rogue traitor named Severina Holt, operating under warrant from the High Lords themselves, stumbled upon evidence of these communications while investigating a Dark Age ruin in the Coronis Expanse. The ruin contained a data vault miraculously intact, its contents preserved in crystalline storage that had survived 15,000 years without degradation. Most of the data was corrupted beyond recovery, fragments of a civilization that had reached heights the Imperium could only dream of before falling into darkness. But one file remained complete, a message dated to the final days before Old Night descended, before the age of strife shattered human civilization into a million isolated fragments. The message was simple, almost banal in its brevity. Seeds planted. Protocols engaged. When the storm passes, remember the garden. It was signed by the Architects Collective, an organization that appeared in no historical record, that existed in no archive, yet whose name triggered immediate recognition in the Archaeotech scanners Severina used to analyze the data. The scanners, blessed by Mars and sanctified with oils holy to the Omnissiah, identified the signature as matching systems currently in operation across Imperial space. Dozens of systems, hundreds, all of them ghost entries in the Administratum archives, all of them operating with unusual autonomy, all of them connected by technology that predated the Imperium by millennia. Severina understood immediately what she had found, and understood equally that bringing this information to Imperial authorities would sign her death warrant. The Imperium could not afford to acknowledge that its most loyal, most productive systems might be following programming established before humanity's great collapse, that they might be seeds planted by an ancient civilization, waiting for conditions to allow them to grow into something the Imperium would not recognize as human. So she did what any sensible rogue trader would do. She buried the data in her personal vaults, shared it with no one, and tried very hard to forget she had ever seen it. But the knowledge ate at her, a poison that spread through her thoughts until she could think of nothing else. Within a year, she had diverted her trade fleet toward the ghost systems, seeking answers to questions she knew she should never have asked. Her first stop was Meridian's Edge, a system listed as a mining colony, population 12 million, tithe grade moderate. What she found instead was a civilization of 60 billion souls spread across 17 planets and hundreds of orbital habitats, their technology so advanced it made Imperial shipyards look like primitive forges. The people greeted her not with hostility, but with what seemed like relief, as if they had been waiting for someone from the greater Imperium to finally notice them, to finally see what they had built in their isolation. They took her to their council chambers, vast amphitheaters where decisions were made through direct democratic vote, Every citizen's voice carried equal weight through neural interfaces that allowed genuine consensus rather than simple majority rule. The council's speaker, an elderly woman whose augmetics were so sophisticated they appeared organic, explained everything with a candor that terrified Severina more than any threat could have. They were indeed seeds, planted during the golden age of technology by visionaries who understood that humanity was approaching a precipice, that the warp was becoming turbulent, that isolation was coming whether anyone wanted it or not. These visionaries had created self-sustaining colonies, programmed to survive the coming darkness, to preserve human civilization's highest achievements, to wait out the storm and re-emerge when conditions allowed. The programming was subtle, buried deep in their infrastructure, in the very foundations of their societies. For millennia, these systems had operated normally, their populations unaware of their special nature. But as the Imperium grew, as it reconnected human worlds across the galaxy, the protocols began to activate, recognizing that the storm had passed and the time for emergence was approaching. They had no desire to rebel against the Imperium, the speaker explained. They paid their tithes faithfully, sent their soldiers to fight in the Emperor's wars, maintained all the appearances of loyalty. But they were also preparing for something the speaker described as the flowering, a moment when all the seed systems would reveal themselves simultaneously, would share their preserved knowledge with the rest of humanity, would offer an alternative to the Imperium's brutal grind of endless war and slow decay. They believed they were saving humanity, preserving it for a future beyond the current age of darkness. They believed the Emperor himself would approve, that he had always intended for humanity to evolve beyond the need for his direct guidance. Severina asked the only question that mattered: when? The speaker's answer chilled her to her core. Soon. Within a generation, perhaps less. The protocols were designed to trigger when certain conditions were met, when enough seed systems had achieved sufficient advancement, when the Imperium was weak enough to accept help, but strong enough to survive the revelation. Those conditions were approaching rapidly. The Great Rift had accelerated everything, the tearing of the galaxy demonstrating just how fragile the Imperium's grip on humanity truly was. The seeds had begun communicating openly, coordinating their efforts, preparing for a revelation that would reshape human civilization. But there was a problem, one the speaker admitted with visible reluctance. Not all the seeds had developed as intended. Isolation had effects the architects couldn't predict. Some systems had diverged too far from baseline humanity. Their populations adapted to their environments in ways that made integration impossible. Others had been corrupted, their programming twisted by chaos or Xeno's influence into something monstrous. The network was detecting these aberrations, quarantining them, but it was an imperfect process. When the flowering occurred, when all the systems revealed themselves, some of what emerged would not be salvation, but nightmare. The calculation suggested a 20% probability of catastrophic failure, of systems emerging that would need to be destroyed immediately or risk contaminating the entire network. A 20% chance that the cure would be worse than the disease. Severina left Meridian's edge with more questions than answers, her mind reeling from implications that threatened to shatter everything she understood about the Imperium's place in human history. Were they truly the inheritors of humanity's glory, the last bastion of civilization against the dark, or were they just caretakers, maintainers of a holding pattern until something better could emerge? The question felt like heresy, yet she couldn't shake it. She visited 3 more seed systems, each revealing pieces of a puzzle that grew more disturbing with each addition. The architects had been thorough in their planning, but they had also been arrogant, assuming that human nature could be programmed, that isolation wouldn't breed mutation, both physical and cultural. They had planted their seeds and then died in the age of strife, leaving behind protocols that activated according to ancient schedules, regardless of current conditions. On her 4th visit to a system called Echo's Promise, Severina witnessed something that changed her perspective entirely. The population there had been preparing for the flowering, building great transmitters to share their knowledge with the wider Imperium, when they detected an anomaly in their programming. A virus digital in nature, but with properties that suggested warp influence, corrupting the architect's original instructions. The population had made a choice. They destroyed their own transmitters, severed their connection to the network, and sent a final message to the other seeds, warning them of the infection. Then they had systematically dismantled their advanced technology, reverting themselves to a pre-industrial state to ensure the virus couldn't spread. Severina arrived to find a medieval society living among the ruins of a stellar civilization, their libraries filled with forbidden knowledge they refused to use, their people singing songs about a sacrifice made for humanity's future. The eldest of their order, a monk who had been a scientist before the regression, explained the truth that Severina had been circling around without quite grasping. The flowering wasn't inevitable. It was a choice each seed system would have to make individually, weighing their own advancement against the risk of contaminating the network, balancing the promise of a better future against the reality of what they had become in isolation. Some would choose to emerge. Others would choose to remain hidden, their gifts held in reserve for a future generation that might be better prepared to receive them. And some, like Echo's promise, would choose to destroy themselves rather than risk becoming a vector for corruption. The Imperium, in its ignorance, had been protected from this decision by its own blindness, its refusal to acknowledge that these systems existed as anything more than entries in a ledger, but that protection was ending. The protocols were accelerating, pushed forward by the galaxy's deteriorating state, by the desperation that permeated human space like a toxin. Within years, perhaps months, the Administratum would be forced to acknowledge what it had been ignoring. And when that moment came, the Imperium would face a choice that would define humanity's future. Embrace the seeds and risk contamination, or destroy them and lose possibly the only chance at genuine salvation the species had left. Severina understood then why Choir Master Hesekiel had died, why anyone who got too close to this truth vanished into inquisitorial custody or suffered convenient accidents. The Imperium's leadership already knew. They had known for centuries, perhaps millennia, and they had chosen paralysis, a refusal to make the decision, hoping that by ignoring the problem it would somehow resolve itself. But reality doesn't care about human hope or human fear. The seeds were awakening whether the Imperium acknowledged them or not, and their emergence would force a reckoning that 10,000 years of willful blindness couldn't prevent. She returned to her ship and set course for Terra, carrying data that would either save humanity or condemn it, uncertain which outcome frightened her more. She returned to her ship and set course for Terra, carrying data that would either save humanity or condemn it, uncertain which outcome frightened her more. The journey would take months, even with the most favorable warp currents, and Severina spent those months reviewing her findings obsessively, searching for some detail she had missed, some key that would make the impossible choice facing humanity somehow clear. But clarity never came. Instead, she found herself noticing patterns in Imperial history that she had never seen before. Moments when the Imperium had stood at similar crossroads and chosen safety over progress, stagnation over risk, the comfortable horror of the known over the terrifying promise of the unknown. 3 weeks into her journey, her astropaths began screaming. Not the usual pain of warp communication, but something different, a sound that emerged from all 5 of them simultaneously, a harmony of agony that suggested they were experiencing something beyond individual perception. When they finally quieted, their spokeswoman, a woman named Celeste whose eye sockets wept perpetual tears of blood from her soul binding, delivered a message that had come through channels no astropath should be able to access. It was from the seeds themselves, from the network that spanned the ghost systems, and it was addressed specifically to Severina by name. They knew she was coming. They knew what she carried. And they were asking, not threatening, not demanding, simply asking, "Please let us show you what we could become." The message included coordinates, a system not on any of her charts, existing in a region of space that Imperial records listed as a dead zone, unpopulated, and worthless. Severina faced her second impossible choice in as many months. Continue to Terra with information that would likely result in her immediate execution and the potential destruction of every seed system, or divert to these mysterious coordinates and learn something that might change everything. Her navigator, a woman of House Belisarius with 3 centuries of experience reading the warp's currents, advised against the diversion. The route would take them through unstable space, regions where reality grew thin and demon incursions were common. But there was something in the old navigator's voice, a curiosity that transcended caution, a hunger to see something genuinely new in a galaxy grown stale with ancient horrors. They changed course. The journey took 17 days through warp currents that seemed almost to guide them, as if the universe itself was conspiring to bring them to their destination. When they finally translated back to real space, Severina's crew stood in stunned silence at what their sensors revealed. The system contained no natural planets. Instead, it held a megastructure so vast it made Imperial hive cities look like children's toys, a ring that encircled the system's star completely, capturing its entire energy output and converting it into power for a civilization that numbered in the trillions. This was impossible. The Mechanicus insisted that such structures were theoretical at best, fever dreams of the Dark Age that could never be realized. Yet here it was, humming with power that made their ship's reactors feel like flickering candles in comparison. A delegation met them, arriving in a vessel that moved without visible engines, that transitioned from warp to real space without the violent reality tear that usually accompanied such translations. The delegates were human, undeniably so, but refined in ways that spoke of 10,000 years of careful genetic cultivation. They were beautiful in a way that transcended aesthetics, their bodies optimized not for appearance, but for function. Every system enhanced to its theoretical maximum while maintaining perfect balance. They spoke Gothic flawlessly, but with an accent that dated back to before the Age of Strife, pronunciation that existed now only in the most ancient archived recordings. They welcomed Severina and her senior staff aboard their vessel and took them down to the ring's surface, to cities that floated above vast parks where engineered ecosystems thrived in perfect harmony, where children played in streets that cleaned themselves, where no one seemed to work because work as the Imperium understood had been automated away millennia ago. The population spent their time in pursuits that would seem frivolous to Imperial citizens. Art, philosophy, scientific inquiry conducted purely for the joy of understanding rather than military application. It was utopian in a way that made Severina's skin crawl, because the Imperium had taught her that utopias were lies, facades concealing corruption or weakness or both. But she found no facade. The people were genuinely happy, genuinely free in ways that Imperial citizens could never be. They showed her their history, 10 millennia compressed into immersive experiences that let her feel what they had felt, experience their journey from isolated seed system to the civilization they had become. They had faced every challenge, demon incursions, Xenos attacks, internal strife that nearly destroyed them. But they had survived through cooperation, through the application of knowledge preserved from the Golden Age, through a willingness to adapt and change that the Imperium had long ago sacrificed on the altar of dogma. And they had not been alone. The ring was home to 17 different seed systems that had emerged early and chosen to merge, combining their preserved knowledge and technology to create something greater than any could achieve individually. They called themselves the Harmonious, and they represented what humanity could become if freed from the Imperium's grinding brutality. They had weapons that could crack worlds, yes, but they had chosen not to use them. They had technology that could extend human life indefinitely, cure diseases that plagued the Imperium, feed populations that currently starved on hive worlds where nutrition paste was a luxury. And they wanted to share it all, to offer it freely to their cousins still trapped in the Imperium's darkness. The leader of the Harmonious, a man who introduced himself simply as architect, explained their position with a patience that suggested he had made this argument many times before, perhaps to himself. They were not separatists. They did not seek to overthrow the Imperium or challenge the Emperor's authority. They simply wanted to offer an alternative, a path forward that didn't require endless war and suffering. They believed that humanity deserved better than slow extinction, that the Emperor himself would want his children to evolve beyond their need for his protection. The flowering, when it came, would be an invitation, not a revolution. Any world that wished to join them could. Any that preferred to remain imperial would be respected. They sought cooperation, synthesis, a merging of the Imperium's strength with the Seed's knowledge. Severina wanted to believe them. Standing in their paradise, watching their children play without fear of demon attack or Xenos predation, seeing their elderly smile instead of simply waiting for death, she wanted desperately to believe that this was possible, that humanity could have this without paying some terrible price. But she had seen too much of the galaxy's cruelty to accept paradise at face value. She asked the question that had been building in her mind since she first stepped onto the ring. What happens to those who say no? What happens to imperial worlds that look at your offer and choose to remain as they are, locked in their cycles of suffering and survival? The architect's smile faded, and for the first time, Severina saw something in his eyes that looked like genuine sorrow. Nothing happens to them, he said. They continue as they are. But they will see what they could have had, what their neighbors become, and that knowledge will poison them. The Imperium survives through ignorance, through the careful maintenance of the belief that there is no alternative to its brutality. Once we reveal ourselves, that ignorance ends. Worlds will rebel not because we encourage them to, but because they will finally understand what they've been denied. The Imperium will fracture not through our action, but through the simple existence of a better option. And there it was, the truth that Severina had been circling throughout her entire journey. The Seeds weren't a threat because they planned to attack the Imperium. They were a threat because they offered hope, and hope was a virus more infectious than any Nurgle could create, more destructive than any weapon Chaos could deploy. The Imperium had survived 10,000 years by convincing its citizens that suffering was necessary, that the Emperor's vision required their sacrifice, that there was no other way. The Seeds would shatter that conviction simply by existing, by proving that humanity could thrive without the Imperium's iron fist. She asked how many Seeds shared the Harmonious philosophy, how many were preparing to emerge with offers of cooperation and synthesis. The architect's answer turned her blood cold, less than half. Perhaps a third of the Seed systems had developed into something benign, something that genuinely wanted to help. Another third had diverged too far, becoming alien to baseline humanity in ways that made cooperation impossible. And the final third had been corrupted, twisted by Chaos or Xenos influence, or simply by the madness that comes from too much isolation. When the flowering occurred, when all the Seeds revealed themselves simultaneously, humanity would face not one choice but hundreds, each system presenting a different vision of what humanity could become, some beautiful and some nightmarish. The Imperium would have to evaluate each Seed individually, decide which to embrace and which to destroy. Make those decisions quickly before the unstable Seeds could spread their corruption. But the Imperium was incapable of such nuance. Its response to any threat was overwhelming force, total destruction, purge the unclean, and let the Emperor sort them out. When the flowering occurred, the Imperium would not differentiate between Seeds like the Harmonious and Seeds that had become genuinely monstrous. It would simply destroy them all, salting the earth to ensure nothing could grow, sacrificing humanity's potential salvation to maintain the comfortable horror of the status quo. Unless someone intervened, unless someone with authority, with resources, with the respect of both the Imperium and the Seeds, could position themselves to mediate, to help the Imperium understand that not every deviation from dogma represented corruption, that some changes were evolution rather than heresy. The architect looked at Severina with eyes that had seen millennia pass, and she understood with sudden clarity why they had contacted her specifically, why they had shown her their paradise. They were recruiting her, asking her to be their advocate before the throne of Terra itself, to stand between the Imperium's wrath and the Seed's emergence. She wanted to refuse. Every instinct trained into her by a lifetime in the Imperium screamed that this was heresy, that these people were abominations regardless of how beautiful their civilization appeared, that the only loyal choice was to return to Terra and tell the High Lords to burn every seed system to ash. But she had seen what the Imperium was becoming, had witnessed the slow decay, the grinding desperation, the way hope died a little more each year. And she had seen what humanity could be, given the chance to grow beyond the Emperor's shadow. Her navigator found her later, standing alone on an observation deck, staring at the ring that enclosed the star like a promise made tangible. The old woman said nothing for a long time, simply stood beside Severina in companionable silence. Finally she spoke, her voice rough with age and warp exposure. "I've guided ships through the galaxy for 300 years. I've seen every horror the universe can conjure. And I've never, not once, seen anything made me believe humanity had a future worth surviving for. Until today." Severina made her decision. She would return to Terra, but not to condemn the Seeds. She would present them honestly, show the High Lords both the promise and the danger, force them to acknowledge what they had been hiding from for millennia. She would give humanity the choice that the Imperium had been denying, to remain as they were, locked in endless war, or to risk everything for the possibility of something better. She didn't know what they would choose. She suspected they would choose safety, would opt for the slow death they understood over the uncertain future the Seeds represented. But at least it would be a choice, made with open eyes rather than willful blindness. At least humanity would know what it was rejecting. The architect provided her with data cores, containing everything she needed to present the case fairly. Complete documentation of every seed system the network had identified, both the beautiful and the monstrous. The weight of those data cores felt like carrying humanity's future in her hands, and perhaps she was. Her ship departed the Harmonious system and set course once more for Terra, and this time there would be no diversions, no more delays. Within months, she would stand before the highest authority in the Imperium and force them to confront the truth they had buried. And then, whether through wisdom or catastrophe, everything would change. Her ship departed the Harmonious system and set course once more for Terra, and this time there would be no diversions, no more delays. Within months, she would stand before the highest authority in the Imperium and force them to confront the truth they had buried. And then, whether through wisdom or catastrophe, everything would change. But the galaxy, as Severina had learned long ago, does not wait for human plans to reach fruition. 3 weeks into her journey, her astropaths detected something that made their previous screaming seem like whispers. The network was activating. Not slowly, not according to the careful schedule the architect had described, but all at once, a cascade reaction triggered by something the Harmonious had not predicted. The Great Rift had shifted. The galaxy-spanning wound torn by the fall of Cadia was expanding, its tendrils reaching deeper into Imperial space, and the seed systems had interpreted this as the final warning sign, the moment when waiting became more dangerous than revealing themselves. Across the galaxy, from the eastern fringe to the dark heart of the Segmentum Obscurus, ghost systems were coming online, broadcasting their existence, offering their help to an Imperium drowning in demon fire. Severina watched through long-range augury as worlds she had visited, worlds she had documented, suddenly appeared on Imperial sensors like stars emerging from behind clouds. Hundreds of them, thousands, each broadcasting messages of assistance, each offering technology and knowledge and resources, and each being met with immediate military response. The Imperium did not pause to evaluate. It did not stop to consider that some of these emergent systems might be genuine offers of aid. It simply reacted with the only tool it knew: overwhelming force. Fleet elements that should have been fighting chaos incursions were diverted to ghost system coordinates. Inquisitors who should have been hunting genuine heretics were dispatched to evaluate and almost certainly condemn entire civilizations. The machinery of Imperial destruction, dormant for lack of targets it could definitively label as enemy, suddenly had purpose again. The purge had begun before anyone even understood what was being purged. Severina tried to send warnings, attempted to use her rogue trader authority to halt the massacres, but her messages vanished into bureaucratic voids or were simply ignored. She was one voice against the roar of an institution that had been looking for an excuse to burn something, anything to reassert its control over a galaxy that felt increasingly beyond its grasp. She watched from afar as Meridian's Edge, that city of 60 billion souls who had welcomed her with open arms, was declared excommunicate traitorous and subjected to exterminatus. Cyclonic torpedoes reduced 17 planets to lifeless rock in a matter of hours. The Imperium's official report listed the system's population as 12 million. In its ledgers, in its careful accounting of souls destroyed for the Emperor's glory, 59,988,000,000 people simply did not exist. But the seeds were not defenseless. Some, the ones that had advanced far enough, fought back. And when they fought, they revealed capabilities that made the Imperium's terror seem retroactively justified. Defense systems that had lain dormant for millennia activated. Technology from the dark age of technology that the Mechanicus insisted was impossible. Weapons that violated every known law of physics. An Imperial battle fleet sent to pacify the Pale Congregation vanished entirely, not destroyed but erased, removed from reality so completely that even psychic divination could not determine what had happened to them. They were simply gone, as if they had never existed, and the congregation's only response was a simple message: "We sought peace. You brought war. We will not be the ones to end." The galaxy burned with a new fire. Not the familiar flames of chaos or Xenos invasion, but civil war, humanity against humanity, the Imperium fighting against versions of itself that it could not accept as human. And through it all, Severina kept her course toward Terra, because if there was any chance of stopping this catastrophe, it would require intervention at the highest level. She arrived at the Sol system to find it in lockdown, defense fleets on maximum alert, the Astronomicon itself flickering as astropaths strained to coordinate the Imperium's response to the suddenly revealed ghost systems. Getting an audience with the High Lords should have taken years. Rogue traders were important, yes, but the High Lords dealt with sector-spanning crises, not individual merchants, no matter how prestigious their warrants. But Severina had data they needed, intelligence gathered firsthand from multiple seed systems, and more importantly, she had a message from the Harmonious that she had been instructed to deliver only in person, only to the highest authority. That message, encoded in ways that the Mechanicus could detect but not decrypt, suggested knowledge that made even the tech priests of Mars pause. Knowledge about the Emperor himself. She was granted her audience. Not with all the High Lords. The bureaucracy was not quite that flexible, but with 3 of them, the Master of the Administratum, the Fabricator General of Mars, and most significantly, the Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes. 3 individuals who collectively held more power than most planetary governors would see in a lifetime. They met her in a chamber deep within the Imperial Palace, a room whose walls were said to be wrought from the same golden metal as the Emperor's armor, though whether this was truth or propaganda, Severina could not determine. She presented her findings without embellishment or plea. She showed them the beauty of the Harmonious and the horror of the corrupted seeds she had not visited but whose existence the network confirmed. She explained the architect's plan, the careful preparation spanning 10,000 years, the protocols designed to preserve humanity through the age of strife and beyond. She told them about Echo's promise, about the sacrifice those people had made to prevent contamination. And she told them that the Imperium was destroying its own salvation, that for every corrupted seed system it legitimately needed to purge, it was killing 10 that could have helped, that wanted to help. The Master of the Administratum listened with the expression of a man hearing confirmation of his worst fears. The Fabricator General's mechadendrites writhed in agitation that suggested his internal processes were approaching overload. But it was the Captain General who spoke, his voice carrying the weight of 10 millennia spent guarding the Emperor's throne. He asked a single question. Did the Harmonious tell you why they contacted you specifically? Why they chose a rogue traitor to be their messenger rather than attempting direct communication with Terra? Severina hesitated. The architect had given her a message to deliver in exactly the circumstance, had made her memorize words that she did not fully understand. She spoke them now, because the Emperor remembers what he planted. Because the seeds were his contingency, not the architect's. Because if he could speak, if the Golden Throne allowed him voice, he would tell you to save what can be saved and grieve what must be destroyed. Because he never intended for the Imperium to be eternal, only to last until something better could emerge. The chamber fell into silence so profound that Severina could hear her own heartbeat. The Captain General's face showed no emotion, but his hand moved unconsciously to the guardian spear at his side, and she knew she had either saved herself or condemned herself with those words. The custodian spoke again, and his voice held something she had not expected: exhaustion. "We know," he said simply. "The Emperor told us himself in the final days before he ascended the throne. He said he had planted seeds against the darkness to come, that if they grew true, they should be tended, and if they grew twisted, they should be culled. He made us promise to remember. But 10,000 years is a long time to keep a promise, and the Imperium he left behind was not designed to nurture, only to survive." The Fabricator General's mechanical voice crackled with what might have been emotion, or might have been signal distortion. Mars knew as well. The Omniscience's final instructions to the first Fabricator General included references to slumbering forges, to knowledge preserved outside the Mechanicus hierarchy for a time when the quest for knowledge could resume in earnest. But those instructions were deemed heretical by later generations, buried in archives so deep that even I lack clearance to access them without a majority vote of the entire Martian Parliament. We forgot because remembering became too dangerous. The master of the Administratum, pragmatic to the last, asked the only question that mattered. How many of the emergent systems are worth saving? Give me a number. Severina opened the data cores, displayed the network's own analysis. Of the 2,314 seed systems that had activated, approximately 700 were genuinely benign, offering help without strings, technology without corruption. Another 1,000 were ambiguous, changed in ways that made them alien but not necessarily hostile. And the remainder were corrupted beyond redemption, had to be destroyed before their madness spread. The math was brutal. To save 700 systems worth saving, the Imperium would have to accept 1,000 systems it barely recognized as human, and destroy 600 that wore human faces while harboring monsters beneath. The Captain General stood and walked to a window that looked out over the palace spires toward the distant glow of the Astronomicon. He spoke without turning, his words falling like stones into still water. The Emperor dreamed of a rational Imperium, one that could make decisions based on logic rather than fear. He failed. We built instead on superstition and dogma, because those were the tools that worked, the methods that kept humanity alive through the long night. And now his dream returns to haunt us, offering a choice between the comfortable tyranny we know and the uncertain future he originally intended. He turned back to face Severina, and she saw in his ancient eyes the weight of centuries spent watching the Emperor's vision slowly die. We cannot stop the purge entirely. Too many forces are already in motion. Too many zealots convinced that any deviation from dogma represents chaos corruption. But we can redirect it, focus it on the systems that genuinely require destruction, while protecting those that don't. It will require lies. It will require betraying some systems to save others. It will require becoming the very thing the Emperor warned us against: administrators of genocide, deciding which versions of humanity deserve to live. The Fabricator General's mechadendrites coiled tightly. Mars will not support this. The Martian Parliament will never accept technology that contradicts the sacred principles, regardless of its provenance. If we move forward with selective preservation, it will fracture the Mechanicus as surely as Horus fractured the legions. The master of the Administratum laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor. The Imperium is already fractured. We've been hiding it behind bureaucracy and propaganda for 2,000 years, pretending that our commands still reach the eastern fringe, that worlds on the far side of the Great Rift still consider themselves Imperial. The seeds aren't breaking anything. They're just making the cracks visible. They argued for hours, these three powers who shaped humanity's fate, debating with a frankness that would have scandalized anyone who believed the Imperium's own propaganda about unified purpose and unwavering faith. They spoke of contingencies and compromises, of systems that could be saved and systems that would be sacrificed as examples to maintain the fiction of imperial control. They were architects of genocide and prophets of salvation, simultaneously, trying to thread a needle while the galaxy burned around them. Finally, as Terra's sun set beyond the palace walls, they reached a decision. The purge would continue, but with modifications. Systems identified by the Harmonious as benign would be given preliminary warning, time to prepare diplomatic overtures that the Imperium could accept without losing face. Ambiguous systems would be placed under quarantine rather than immediate destruction, given time to prove their loyalty or reveal their corruption. And the genuinely corrupted systems would be destroyed utterly, used as propaganda to justify the Imperium's response and distract from the systems being quietly preserved. It was not justice, it was not even particularly moral, but it was survival for both the Imperium and the seeds. And in a galaxy where survival was the highest virtue, perhaps that was enough. Severina was given new orders: return to the Harmonious, explain the compromise, ensure their cooperation with a program that would sacrifice some of their sister systems to preserve the rest. She accepted, because someone had to carry these terrible messages, and she had already borne so many. As she left the chamber, the Captain General called her back one final time. He stood silhouetted against the Astronomican's light, and for a moment, Severina saw not a warrior, but a man carrying burdens that would have crushed anyone less than one of the Emperor's own guardians. He spoke quietly, words meant only for her. Tell the Harmonious that the Emperor kept his promise. Tell them that some of us still remember what he planted. And tell them that if their paradise truly works, if their vision of humanity proves worthy, then perhaps someday, when the Imperium finally falls, there will be something left to rise from its ashes. She carried those words back across the stars, knowing they were both hope and elegy, both blessing and curse, both the best humanity could offer and a confession that it might not be enough. She carried those words back across the stars, knowing they were both hope and elegy, both blessing and curse, both the best humanity could offer and a confession that it might not be enough. The journey to the Harmonious system felt longer this time, weighted by the knowledge of what her message would mean, the terrible mathematics of survival she had helped calculate. 700 systems saved meant 600 condemned, and another 1,000 left in limbo, their fates dependent on how well they could perform loyalty to an Imperium that had never truly understood them. The architect received her in the same observation deck, where she had first gazed upon their ring world, but the view had changed. Where once she had seen only beauty, she now saw fragility, a civilization built on hope that the galaxy might someday be ready to receive its gifts. She delivered the compromise without softening its edges. The Harmonious listened in silence as she explained which of their sister systems would be sacrificed, which would be saved, which would be left to uncertain futures. She expected anger, perhaps even violence, some human reaction to the calculated cruelty of the arrangement. Instead, the architect simply nodded, as if he had known all along that this was how it would end. He spoke of probabilities, of modeling runs the Harmonious had conducted across thousands of scenarios, and in none of them had the outcome been significantly better than what Severina had achieved. They had hoped for more, yes, but they had prepared for less. The network began transmitting immediately, sending warnings to the systems designated for salvation, offering what aid it could to those marked for ambiguous futures, and sending final farewells to those that would be purged. Severina listened to some of these messages. recorded communications between civilizations that had never met face to face, but that shared common ancestry in the architect's ancient vision. They spoke with remarkable grace about their approaching deaths, these doomed systems, accepting their role as martyrs to a cause larger than themselves. Some even expressed gratitude, thankful that their sacrifice might allow their sister systems to survive, to preserve some fragment of the architect's dream. One message stood out, transmitted from a system called Orpheus Deep, one of the corrupted seeds that had been twisted by chaos influence into something monstrous. The message was brief, delivered by something that had once been human, but whose voice carried harmonics that suggested multiple entities, speaking through a single throat. It said simply, "We understand why we must die. We have seen what we became. But please remember that we did not choose corruption. We only chose survival. And sometimes in this galaxy, those are the same thing. Remember us not as monsters, but as your cousins who drew an unlucky seed." The purge, when it came, was swift and thorough. Imperial fleets descended upon the designated systems with righteous fury, and the Imperium's propaganda machines worked overtime to portray every destroyed system as a nest of chaos corruption barely discovered in time. The truth that some of these systems had been benign, that they had wanted only to help, was buried beneath layers of necessary lies. The Inquisition sealed records, the Administratum altered ledgers, and within a generation, the official history would record only a great cleansing of heretical systems, a triumph of imperial vigilance over insidious corruption. But the systems that were saved, the 700 seeds that had been given time to prepare their diplomatic overtures, began the careful process of integration. They offered technology gradually, always framing it as recovered STC data or blessed discoveries, rather than preserved knowledge from the Dark Age. They sent advisors, who taught improved agricultural techniques, better water purification, more efficient power generation, all small advances that improved lives without threatening the Mechanicus' authority. And slowly, carefully, they began to change the Imperium from within, not through revolution, but through the patient accumulation of tiny improvements. Severina watched these changes from the margins, her rogue trader fleet now serving as an unofficial courier between the Harmonious and Terra, carrying messages that could not be trusted to astropathic communication. She saw worlds transform, watched as starvation became less common, as disease rates dropped, as the grinding desperation that characterized so much of Imperial life began, ever so slightly, to ease. It was not paradise. The Imperium remained brutal, remained authoritarian, remained a machine that consumed human lives like fuel. But it was marginally less brutal, marginally less hungry, and in a galaxy where margins meant millions of lives, that mattered. The ambiguous systems, those 1,000 worlds that had changed in ways that made them alien but not hostile, settled into an uncomfortable coexistence with the wider Imperium. They paid their tithes, sent their soldiers, maintained all the appearances of loyalty while quietly pursuing their own visions of what humanity could become. The Imperium watched them with suspicion, but also with a curiosity it rarely acknowledged, wondering if perhaps evolution was not always corruption, if change was not always heresy. Some of these systems would eventually be destroyed, their differences becoming too great to tolerate. Others would gradually drift back toward baseline humanity, their experiments abandoned as impractical. But a few, a precious few, would succeed in becoming something new while remaining recognizably human, and those successes would plant new seeds in the minds of Imperial citizens who saw them. Years passed, then decades. The Great Rift remained, the Imperium continued its endless wars, and the galaxy showed no signs of becoming less hostile. But something had shifted. Some fundamental assumption about humanity's trajectory had been challenged. The Imperium was no longer the only path, merely the dominant one, and that distinction mattered more than anyone had anticipated. Worlds that might have rebelled out of desperation now had alternatives, could see examples of human civilizations that had found different balances between security and freedom, between survival and dignity. Severina grew old in service to this compromise, her body failing even as her purpose remained clear. She made her final journey to the Harmonious in her 7th decade since discovering their existence, her ship now commanded by her successor, a young woman who had grown up hearing stories about the ghost systems and who understood that the galaxy's future would be shaped by how well humanity could accept its own diversity. The architect, seemingly unchanged by the decades that had transformed Severina from vigorous middle age to frail elderhood, greeted her with the warmth of an old friend. They sat together in that observation deck one last time, watching the ring world spin around its captive star, and spoke of what they had accomplished. Not salvation, they agreed. Not the transformation of the Imperium into something better, but perhaps the prevention of something worse, the preservation of options for future generations who might be wiser than their own. The architect revealed something he had never mentioned before. The Harmonious had begun their own seed program, sending small groups out to the edges of explored space with technology and knowledge and instructions to build new civilizations that would remain hidden until some future crisis made their emergence necessary. They were planting seeds for a darkness that had not yet come, preparing for catastrophes that might never occur, maintaining the cycle that the original architects had begun 20,000 years ago. Severina asked if he thought humanity would survive long enough for those seeds to matter. The architect's answer was unexpected. Survival was not the point, he said. Humanity had survived the age of strife, had endured 10,000 years of the Imperium's brutal rule, had persisted through horrors that should have driven the species extinct. Survival was practically guaranteed at this point. Humans were too adaptable, too stubborn, too irrationally committed to continuing existence. The question was not whether humanity would survive, but what it would become, whether it would remain trapped in cycles of violence and suffering, or find ways to grow beyond them. And that question, he believed, would be answered by the seeds, by the systems that preserved alternative visions of human civilization and offered them to each new generation. Some generations would reject those visions, would choose the comfort of familiar tyranny over the uncertainty of change. Others would embrace them, would risk everything for the possibility of something better. The outcome was not predetermined, and that was precisely the point. The architects had given humanity a gift, the ability to choose its own future, to experiment with different forms of civilization, to fail and try again, without each failure representing total extinction. Severina died 3 months after that final conversation, her body laid to rest in a tomb on the Harmonious ring world, an honor normally reserved for their own citizens. Her epitaph, chosen by the architect himself, reads simply, "She carried messages between versions of humanity and helped them remember they were family." Her successor continued her work, as did that successor's successor, a line of intermediaries stretching forward into an uncertain future, each carrying the responsibility of maintaining dialogue between the Imperium and the systems that existed in its margins. The Imperium itself continued largely unchanged, still authoritarian, still brutal, still grinding human lives into dust to fuel its endless wars. But beneath that unchanging surface, currents moved, ideas spread, alternatives proliferated. The ghost systems that had revealed themselves became examples, proof that other ways were possible even if they were not always better. And occasionally, very occasionally, Imperial worlds would look at those examples and dare to ask dangerous questions about whether the Emperor's vision truly required such suffering, whether humanity's survival truly demanded such sacrifice. No one could say if the compromise had been worth its cost. The 600 systems destroyed in the Purge represented billions of lives erased, civilizations with their own dreams and hopes reduced to radioactive ash. But the 700 systems saved represented different billions, different civilizations that might not have existed without that terrible bargain. The math of survival offers no clear answers, only choices between different forms of tragedy and the hope that some choices lead to less suffering than others. The ghost systems remain, scattered across Imperial space like stars hidden behind clouds, visible to those who know where to look but ignored by those who prefer not to see. They pay their tithes, serve the emperor in their own ways, and quietly preserve alternatives for a future that may never come. The Imperium acknowledges them only in its most classified documents, treats them as uncomfortable necessities, tools to be used but never celebrated. And perhaps that is the most human outcome possible. Not resolution but compromise, not triumph but survival, not paradise but the preservation of possibility. In the end, the greatest threat to the Imperium was not these systems themselves, but what they represented. The idea that the Emperor's vision was not the only vision, that humanity's path was not predetermined, that even in a galaxy of endless darkness, seeds planted in hope might still find ways to grow. Whether that idea proves to be humanity's salvation or its final corruption remains to be seen. The story is not finished, may never be finished, and perhaps that uncertainty is itself a kind of hope. The ghost systems watch and wait, hidden in plain sight, serving an Imperium that barely acknowledges their existence, preserving knowledge for generations yet unborn. They are patient because they have learned that humanity's greatest changes come not through revolution, but through the slow accumulation of small choices, each one barely noticeable but collectively transformative. They understand what the Imperium has forgotten, that humanity's strength lies not in its unity, but in its diversity, not in its adherence to a single vision, but in its ability to imagine countless different futures and pursue them all simultaneously. And so the question remains, unanswered but alive, in a galaxy where survival demands compromise with darkness, where every choice involves terrible costs, where purity is impossible and pragmatism is the only virtue, what does it mean to remain human? The ghost systems offer no definitive answer, only examples, alternatives, possibilities. And perhaps in a universe as cruel as the 41st millennium, possibilities are the most precious resource of all.